I only needed 2 years to graduate. And the reason for that was because rejected by Caltech and waitlisted by MIT. I was really, lost for a little bit because
What was your overall adventure with education?
I think as a high schooler, I was very jaded. I didn't believe that a lot of the stuff I was learning was very useful. Ultimately, I think I realized that the biggest thing that was missing for me was, but the real question is, what will ChatGPT not be able to do in 10 years? That's where humans need to fit in. The world is the game because I choose to make it the way that I want.
Fellow Gen Z founders, today we have Dhruv Kulkarni here, previously co-founder of Brutus AI, which got acquired by Forta Health, currently founder of DocuBridge, a finance modeling software for finance. He's also a UC Berkeley EECS dropout and a former AI researcher. So many things at such a young age, but today we'll be diving way back to when you're a baby growing up in LA. So you went to high school in the Hollywood area, started your first business, an ML consulting firm for local businesses. How did you get this idea initially and in the world of AI?
Yeah, so it's funny. I think it started in a pretty roundabout fashion. Started with a nonprofit, funnily enough. So in the COVID days, me and a few friends we noticed that there was a large problem with learning, in that it was pretty easy to learn things, with classes. Classes are great, but especially for younger folks in high school and maybe sometimes college students, it was very difficult to learn subjects that are not commonly taught in schools. So we started a nonprofit called NGen Learning to teach classes on things like debate, AI, design, public speaking, classes that are not commonly taught in schools, so that people would have the chance to, access new subjects. So we started this nonprofit. It was my first real experience building out an organization, leading people, serving, groups of people, and just building out a real service that could, impact people. So I taught the AI class back then, and I realized that a lot of people out there are really curious about this AI thing, and there
Hmm.
weren't uh, many resources available on how to learn AI and how to use AI. So I taught an AI class to, a few hundred, and then eventually a few thousand people online during the COVID days. And after talking to many of them, I realized that, there's this big gap that everybody's curious about what AI is. Not only do they not know how to, learn how to do it, they also don't really know how to use it. So this didn't apply to just students; it also applied to small businesses. So, it kind of made me curious. Started by going out there to talk to, more small businesses, restaurants, shops, small healthcare companies, small finance companies, just interviewing them, asking like, okay, like, what do you think about AI? Is this something that could be useful to you? Everybody was curious, but nobody really knew how to use the tool. So I decided to start an ML consulting firm called Arlight to help people use AI more effectively, build custom solutions for them, just to, make an impact, drive an impact on their businesses.
So talking about like the overall scene back then with AI, could you set some context on like how AI was back then? I'm pretty sure it wasn't really that popular, right?
Yeah, so I'd say generative AI was pretty underground at the time, but there still was a lot of excitement around, things like classification models, recommender systems. Back then, YouTube and Google had already blown up, and social networks were all the rage. There were applications of AI like classifiers, fraud detection. All these things already existed. There were amazing packages out there like TensorFlow, PyTorch, and so on, but nothing like ChatGPT. So learning how to use these systems, you had to actually go and write the code yourself. Funnily enough, but I mean these days we don't have to do that so much. But
Hmm.
back then AI was still very exciting. It's just there was a lot more confusion around what the use cases were because AI wasn't this thing that everyday people knew a lot about. It was much more underground. Like, oh, you go watch a movie like Terminator, and you say, okay, AI is this big scary thing. The layman did not know really conceptually how AI can help this person. It was more like a domain expert or a subject matter expert knows how AI is useful. Still, it's tricky to apply it. So back then it was, kind of still this nascent concept that many people knew about, but it wasn't this everyday thing that it is today.
Going back to like the overall venture, I think we previously discussed that things didn't really work out too well at the end. So could you like describe what actually happened in the process?
Yeah, so I'd say big picture, we served some clients, we made some money, we hired teams. I learned a lot about what it means to actually build a business, how to manage a team, how to find customers, how to serve them. Ultimately, I think I realized that the biggest thing that was missing for me was I think I didn't have full alignment with my co-founders at the time, co-founders and team members. And generally, I mean, for those of you in the audience that have built startups, you'll know that at the core, the most important thing is the person you work with or the people you work with. Because at the end of the day, a business is just a group of people that serve other groups of people. So if you have shaky foundations, then it's tricky. So ultimately, we ended up having team disagreements, and so didn't end up going all the way. I still am big fans of the people I worked with. Uh, the ultimate thing was that we just had slightly different goals for what we wanted to work on, so disbanded the company.
So right now, in terms of co-founder, what do you personally look for?
Yeah, so the guy I currently work with, Arnav, uh, he's amazing. I think that he and I have extreme value overlap. We really care about the same things. We need to win, but not at the expense of our morals and our ethics. We're both really high integrity people, and we deeply care about each other. I don't want to see him, burn out. He doesn't want to see me burn out. He really cares about me. He's somebody I can fully trust and rely on, and I've never had a doubt about that. And the same goes, vice versa. I think the difference is that differences with previous co-founders is that maybe we had slight differences in goals or values. And all the people I've worked with, I can say they're great people, super strong people, uh, super smart, hardworking, talented people. I think the small things add up. So finding the right person is very difficult because even small differences in values or goals amount to big changes in how you might run a business. So the business where people want to take it can diverge. So Arnav and I think we have this very similar visions, very similar goals and values, and so therefore we have worked very well together on this latest business.
I mean, this is a very super interesting point because I'm starting to see a lot more startups, especially like young founders, find their co-founder through online platforms, through like YC or through LinkedIn itself. So I'm just curious because for myself, like for some of my previous startups, I also found my co-founder online. So we haven't actually met in person. So they're probably
Yeah,
like in the US. I'm currently in Hong Kong here. So what do you think about, working with online founders?
yeah. Initially, for my first business, it was actually fully online. Uh, my first nonprofit was fully people that I'd worked with before and knew. Uh, I think YC's advice is that the best co-founder is somebody that you already know. And I'm actually inclined to agree with that. But I think the best way to test is to do small projects together before you take the leap. Uh, I would not, I would not raise money with someone. I would not incorporate with someone, start, billing massive contracts with someone until you're confident that they're the right person that you want to go all the way with. Because once you raise money with someone, it's very tricky to go back. You're tied down by a lot of legal restrictions. Uh, and then suddenly you have other people relying on that relationship between you and your co-founder. So whether it's customers, your team, your investors, and this kind of stuff happens all the time, where you raise a lot of money and then the co-founders leave, or one co-founder leaves, and then the team that you've hired has a lot of instability and issues. The investors, have uh, lower confidence in returning their money. The customers have a lower product experience, worse product experience, and that's bad because these people have put faith in you. So I think my biggest piece of advice there is to, whether it's online or in person, I think both are great because the world is becoming more digitized. The piece of advice is to be very confident that the person you're working with is good before diving deeper into scaling your business, whether it's raising capital or serving customers. And the way to do that is to do smaller projects, whether it's hackathons, consulting projects, just building things or trying to sell to people. Because the way to know a person will not leave you when times get tough is to actually go through tough times with them. So, that's my recommendation, to just be in the trenches with somebody.
I think that's some really wise advice. I think like many people will probably also do something like vested equity or doing like a trial period before actually onboarding them fully into the company. But yeah, definitely doing something small and going through some challenges would really show their true face as well. So speaking about your grades, since you also done lots of research on the side and the startup itself, like how was your grades like back in high school?
Yeah. So high school, um, I had a perfect GPA. I had like 4.8 or something like that. Uh, I was a straight A student, and I took every AP class possible and every college course possible. But to be honest with you, I don't feel as if, and I say this not to brag, but the classes weren't too tricky. But also, I didn't think I focused on them as much as I could have. I think I definitely could have focused more on the classes to get more out of them. But rather, I kind of gamified them. did the bare minimum that I needed to just get the grades that I wanted, and then move on and focus on these, startups, businesses, that kind of thing. Sometimes there's regrets there. Sometimes people later in life think, okay, maybe I should have, focused more on school, learn these things. It's an experience that you can't go back to because you're only in school once, right? But for me, I never really struggled with school. I wouldn't say that, I, and this is true for both high school and college. College classes, I went to Berkeley. Berkeley has very tricky college classes, so I was not a straight A student, but I still had a decent GPA. Um, Overall, I'd say for me, I chose to optimize for doing the minimum to get to the threshold I wanted grade wise, and then focus all my time on other things.
Speaking about like high school courses, what do you think about like the modern education system? Like, we heard so many things about it, right? I think I had a period where I was completely I was completely opposed with the entire system. I was just questioning what I was learning. And then
Yeah.
there was, another period where I started realizing that the stuff that I'm learning might be actually useful. So what was your overall adventure with education?
That's a good question. I think as a high schooler, I was very jaded. I didn't believe that a lot of the stuff I was learning was very useful, and that everything that would be useful was stuff that I could learn myself and push myself into.
Mm.
I think a lot of entrepreneurs start out that way. But then I think after you dive a bit deeper into that trough of disillusionment, then you start to see that there's actually value to the stuff that they teach you. So looking back now, I think the AP curriculum is incredible. I think the stuff they teach you in that curriculum is great. A lot of these classes have actually useful stuff. Like knowing, I think if you take all the AP classes and just remember all the AP classes worth of knowledge, that's a great base of knowledge and of understanding and logic. Just knowing how to do everything there, I think that takes you pretty far in life. Um, but I think the tricky part is that the college application system optimizes for surface level resume uh, and attentionomics, which means just get as much attention as you can, make things look really good on paper, even if they're not really as good, sound really sophisticated, and maybe this is I believe most don't share. That's just my belief, but uh, I think that makes people optimize for getting good grades at the cost of learning, and getting nice looking activities at the cost of actually doing things. So, in terms of the education system, I think there's some misalignment between what colleges look for and what people should actually be doing to optimize themselves for the long run. Uh, and yeah, going to a good school sets you up really well for the rest of your life, because I think the opportunities that these good schools give you, the people, the connections, the resources, they and I say good school is very openly, liberally. I'm not sure how people define that, but I think there's always some kind of mental hierarchy people have. I think the tricky part there is that when you go to high school, the classes that they put you in, if you take AP classes, that's great. I think that actually teaches you a lot. But I think the hard part is the college application system, what it optimizes for, and what that forces people to do when it comes to setting up their resumes.
Diving deeper into this, what is your like general definition of education?
So I think this is a famous saying: the best investment somebody can make is into their education. But I think that broadly that definition doesn't mean degrees, doesn't mean master's degree, MBA, PhD, or something like that. It means anything that means you broaden your own intelligence, knowledge, whatever. Uh, I think they say this is another saying. I'm vaguely quoting things, but they say that if you want to make more money, you want to meet more people, find people who are in higher income classes, to find people who you like. Then the best way to do that is just to get more degrees, get a upper higher level education, and I think that used to be very true. But now I think because of digitization, because of the overwhelming amount of resources and efficiency we have, increased efficiency in finding jobs and connecting to people and selling, uh, education has now broadened to not just be this old-fashioned traditional degree. And maybe I say this because I'm in the Silicon Valley, where there's a lot of dropouts running things. But I think that now education means just knowing how to do things. You can learn how to do things yourself. You can learn how to do things by taking online courses. You can build your own projects, right? I don't need to take a course to build a newsletter. But let's say I run a newsletter that has 70,000, 100,000 subscribers. That looks great on my resume, number one. And number two, maybe I don't even need to have a resume in the first place, right? Maybe that newsletter itself becomes something that makes me millions of dollars in cash flow. And maybe that just becomes my goal in and of itself. So I think now technology and media and capital and talent have opened up new pathways to to fulfillment and to financial liberation. And those things don't necessarily require traditional degrees. So to me, education just means learning how to do things yourself.
Mhm. I very agree with you on the definition of education. I also added how education for me is also figuring out your strengths and weaknesses. So like figuring out your soft skills and making you think critically, right? Because like with AI and everything, like it's going to be more about the human judgment, which matters at the end of the day, not really kind of like the knowledge itself. Obviously, knowledge plays a role because
Yeah, yeah,
if you don't understand in something in a certain field, then you really can't make judgment, right? So going back to your college application process, I think we prepared a couple journal entries here. So like, could you run us through like what was your overall thinking? What were some highlights? What were some challenges?
yeah, yeah. So going into the process, I had a list of 18 schools that I applied to. I applied early to MIT, Caltech, Georgia Tech, University of Michigan, Northeastern, uh, and the last three gave results mid January and until February. I think the first two gave results like mid December. I got rejected by Caltech and waitlisted by MIT. Uh, sorry, deferred by MIT and then later waitlisted. But initially in that rejection and deferral, I was really lost for a little bit because I thought I'd worked really hard during high school and up to the point to get into the schools I wanted to get into, and unfortunately I didn't. Looking back, amazing outcome. Like, I'm very happy with where I am. I wouldn't change a single thing. But in that moment, I was like, wow, this is everything I did was for nothing. Like I have to work way harder. Uh, and I later on I got into Georgia Tech, Michigan, and Northeastern. For me, the financials didn't work out because being from a California high school, I didn't get aid for the public schools. Northeastern was also fairly expensive for me, given that it's a private school out of state. So I needed something different. Either I needed aid, or I needed to go to a state school. I would have made the exception for MIT or Caltech because I really had fallen in love with those schools, but did not end up getting either of those. The later part of that process was regular decisions, meaning schools like Stanford, the Ivies, the UCs. Later on, I ended up getting waitlisted at uh, four out of the five Ivies that I applied to. So I got waitlisted at Harvard, Cornell, uh, Columbia, and Penn, and I got rejected by Brown. So I had four waitlists in the Ivies. I rejected by Stanford also, but
Hmm.
these waitlists just made it was kind of like just like a slap in the face, right? It's like you're so close, you're just not there. So close, you're not there. You're missing something. I'm like, what am I missing, right? So I spent a lot of time, just working hard, sending updates to these colleges, saying like, hey, let's uh, please let me in because I have done all this really cool work. For some reason, maybe it's just a cultural thing. It was really important to me that I got into one of these schools, even if I didn't decide to go, because it felt like a personal challenge. Like, can I do this or not? I've never really struggled in school, never really struggled with these other things that I'm doing, and now this one thing I can't get it. So it's a personal insult. I have to work hard to get this, even if I don't end up going to these schools. So I got into Berkeley, I got into UCLA, but I really wanted one of these Ivies because it was a wait list. It just felt like I'm so close. So unfortunately, did not end up getting into any of those. Committed to Berkeley EECS. Uh, Initially, was actually not very excited because I didn't really know what Berkeley was because I'd for a long time specifically been very excited about MIT and Harvard. Uh, but after learning more about Berkeley, after coming here, after just getting deeper into what it is, I realized that it's an awesome place with lots of opportunities, and probably actually fits me a lot better than many of the other schools that I was excited about. But during this period where I was really just you know upset that I didn't get what I wanted, I decided I wanted to challenge myself more. So I started that ML consulting firm after committing to Berkeley, after deciding I just need to be pushing myself more, trying to achieve more things, and so on and so forth.
Hmm. That's a super inspiring story. I mean, just using these as a motivation to do something deeper and to create something bigger, I think is a really good takeaway. So, like speaking about Berkeley, one thing I think we talked about was how you were able to shrink the time that you're in Berkeley and graduate faster. So rather than doing like the normal 4 years, you were able to do it in like 2, 3 years by taking more classes in a semester or using transfer credit. So could you talk a bit more about like the procedures on like what courses kind of transfer, like in a really general and
Yeah,
broad picture?
yeah. So I came into Berkeley, and after having taken a ton of AP classes and college classes in high school, I only needed uh, 2 years to graduate, assuming I did one or two summer classes between. And the reason for that was because a lot of the credits that I had achieved in high school transferred over very nicely, and that was great because it meant that I could either finish early and then move on to something else, or spend a lot more time on other stuff during the undergrad and still graduate on time theoretically. uh, I ended up kind of following the path of the latter in the beginning, but I think in the beginning this made me happy because after committing to Berkeley I was not very happy, so I was like, okay, I don't have to be there for that long, it's only 2 years, it's fine. And then after that I can go try to get a PhD at Stanford. So in the beginning I just tried to go and do a lot of research, exciting stuff, try to get publications, uh, so that I could go, leave Berkeley and try to do a PhD somewhere else. But I realized that that's actually not what I was very passionate about. So more passionate about entrepreneurship. And Berkeley is an incredible place, not just for research, but also for entrepreneurship. Which was came to my surprise because I didn't really know this coming in, but now it feels so obvious in hindsight. So instead of doing the 2 year graduation path, I took 3 classes in the fall, 4 classes in the spring, I believe one in the summer, and then later on another one, a few summers later, 3 in the fall, and now after having gapped again, I only have 4 classes left after being in school for like 3 semesters. So I think what I like about Berkeley is if you are in state, then you pay less money, which is great. If you are taking a specific degree, so if you're in College of Engineering and you're doing the EECS degree, you get a lot of credits that transfer. So I wouldn't say this is a hack. It's more so just the way that things are set up with different degrees. So if you're curious about this, I would look more at specific schools, credit acceptances, credit transfers, what classes you've taken. And this generally varies college by college and degree by degree. So Berkeley EECS, very different than Berkeley by Engineering, very extremely different than Berkeley, traditional CS, which is actually in a different college. So, there's a lot of different rules and regulations, but I think that just comes down to being well researched and well prepared.
Awesome. So like I would assume that you probably transferred everything from the prereqs, right? So like all of your prereqs are already completed, so you just jump straight to the major work, and then you just do your higher electives and stuff like that.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So moving on, like speaking about Berkeley, you started out as an AI researcher. So we wanted to dive a bit into talking about your thoughts on, the current AI bubble with companies like DeepSeek that shocked all of us, right? Musk's Grook model releasing, I think about like 2 weeks ago. It feels like there's always something new every single week coming out. So when we spoke initially, you mentioned something very interesting on how actually DeepSeek was possible, which was because the US is overpaying software engineers, right? Whereas China themselves have an undercapitalized talent density with more software engineers on a lower payroll, along with their GPU shortage, which also enabled them to develop tech that worked on like different hardware. So I'm curious to know, let's say like 10 years down the line, so 2035, where can you imagine AI's development to be?
Yeah. I really honestly, and I'll make a good guess, but I honestly can't even tell
Mm.
where it's going to be next week, because it's moving so fast. When you talked about DeepSeek, you talked about, Grok. Earlier today, Anthropic released their Claude 3.7 Sonnet, which is, hybrid reasoning and traditional model. It's supposedly really good. There's new stuff like deep research. Everybody's calling their new research model deep research. Perplexity has a deep research model. Uh, Databricks just raised another like 14-15 billion dollars from Meta of all places. Like there's always something crazy happening. Hard to predict. Not just what individual players will do, but also how the players interact with each other. You know, like Elon buying Twitter, that was totally unexpected. Twitter making its own AI model, also interesting. And then Elon starting an AI company that licenses its model to Twitter, crazy, right? Uh, Databricks raising from Meta, which makes all these open source models, and then Databricks hosting them. Collaborations like that, or even with startups, where Anthropic has been so collaborative with AWS. So I think that's what makes it tricky to predict what's going to happen. Not just that the leaps and bounds at which AI research progresses have just sped up, but also that the players interact with each other in ways that are difficult to predict. So yeah, but about 2035, um, I think everybody will have a personal AI companion that I can fully customize the way I want to. So I don't know where it'll live. It'd be cool if it lived in smart glasses, or if it'll live in your computer or phone. If there even will be computers or phones at that point. But I think the beauty behind a personal AI companion is that it can be anything you imagine. If I want it to be, the world is gamified into exactly the way that I want it to be. For example, every push-up I do, I get 1 point. Every time I go to the gym, I get 100 points. Every time I do this, then I get this many points. I can design that game. And somebody else doesn't have to make it for me. The world is the game because I choose to make it the way that I want. Or another person can say, every time that I, give you a command, I want you to execute that for my work. It's not just a personal companion; it's a work companion, right? You want to make phone calls, the AI will make phone calls for you. You want to do emails? What even is an email, right? It's just communicating to me telling the AI something, the AI tells another AI, and then that AI tells its person. It's just, it could be a few words, right? So I think big picture, I see a lot more, assistant technology where everything is no longer the interface that we see it as today. Like I don't have to look at a computer screen. I can just be wherever I want to be. I have these glasses on my face maybe, and the smart glasses I can communicate to and will execute all the operations in real time, just listening to my commands and so on. So that's one vision. Of course, can have a few other thoughts on that, but that's big picture what I think.
So like diving more into like this overall idea because it's super interesting. I think people would definitely want to imagine more in the future. So if we're able to break this down in like three different categories, right? Number one, for students on education, and then number two for small businesses or businesses in general, and number three for people in their elderlies or their daily lives itself. So just
Yeah.
speaking about like students first, where can you see like the biggest impact of like these smart vision goggles or just AI in general for education, like for young populations?
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think knowledge will become less. I think general knowledge will become less important, and specific knowledge will become tremendously important. So here's an example. Already, if there was something I wanted to know, I could Google it, right? But now any piece of information that's accessible to an AI system, everybody can have instantly, right? So that means that anything that's available doesn't need to be taught because some system will already have it. But if there's something that only a select few group of people know, that means that piece of information is suddenly a massive edge over everybody else. So learning information like that is important. So, having students go out there and do research projects and solve problems and do, science experiments, whether it's, data science experiments, wet lab stuff, or even just getting out in the world and doing things like experimentally, that will be important because the method of learning is more important than learning something that everybody else has already learned. So trying to come to novel conclusions. That's one thing. Another one is that because general knowledge is less important, I think reasoning and logic will be super important. So right now, I don't need to memorize facts about U.S. history anymore because they are already, accessible by my AI system. Instead, I need to really deeply understand why is it that Washington made this choice over this choice, or why is it that during World War II this was the way that the war went. And if I were to make decisions similar to that right now, what would be different, or things like that. So I think the reasoning becomes more important. So logic problems, like having people do scenarios, or having people do mental mapping and reasoning, like really deeper, harder logic skills become more important, which means I think it's actually harder to teach. So I'd say those are the things that become more important and less important in education in the future.
So we would say like traditional exams are probably going to be replaced by more project based, more logic based, or more creativity based
Yeah, that
exams.
and also I think
Mm.
deeper problem solving, where um, where you really have to get deeper into a problem to understand it, and it could be, I mean, AI systems can solve a lot of these simple problems already. So what problems remain, for humans to solve? Not yet obvious, right? Like what can ChatGPT not do? That is what we have to learn. But the real question is, what will ChatGPT not be able to do in 10 years? That's where humans need to fit in. And if there is nothing, then great, right? Because that means that suddenly people can live their lives in peace and they don't have to work anymore. and they only work on stuff they want to work on. And I think that's a good vision, right? Then people can solve problems autonomously. Doctors can improve people's lives without having to spend 16, 18-hour days and burning out. Lawyers don't have to do the same thing. They can impact people's lives and so on and so forth. People can build businesses way easier and improve their lives. But I think that vision is still a little far away. It may take some time. Within 10 years, maybe.
I think there was definitely this idea that was going around where if we're able to basically use AI as like, like replace them with customer reps and just cashiers or like low um, or like less creative tasks and more automated tasks, and then humans only does things that they really want, then you're able to build a world where everyone is happy and stuff like that. But I think that's definitely like something that we'll have to see in the future moving on.
Yeah.
So with like enterprises and stuff like that, like businesses in general, where do you think AI will make the biggest impact?
Yeah, I think we'll see a lot of these extremely fast breakout startups, uh, disrupt incumbents just by nature of speed and new modalities. If you look at some of the fastest growing startups right now, they are such lean teams. Like Cursor is, I think, still less than 50 people, and they're doing 100 million in ARR. It's like 2 million per person. I think it might be 30 people. There's like Icon.me, which is an AI ad maker, and they did 5 million in the first month. There's Glean, which just reached 100 million with less than 3 years in time. Extremely fast growing companies, right? There's Gamma, there's Codium, there's Bolt, there's all these different AI native companies that grow really fast. So I think that a lot of these will become enterprises. A lot of enterprises that were previously, making revenue off of multiple streams will have a lot of these streams that were old and inefficient just get chopped down. So there will be a lot of disruption. I think AI startups will come out and break out of, of where they are right now and disrupt, especially application layer companies in both consumer and in application layer companies. I think enterprises themselves will probably reduce headcount a lot. Like if you look at the most innovative companies, like Meta is clearly an innovative company. They're doing a lot of layoffs. Not that I believe in like endorsing layoffs just for the sake of efficiency, but they're leading the trend and laying off lots of people, automating them with AI. There's companies like Klarna, which is now actually not hiring new people at all. So their headcount reduces every single year because they just automate more and more with AI. They automate customer service, they automate marketing, sales, lots of engineering functions. So yeah, I think companies get leaner, way leaner, and they also move faster, but also markets get crowded way faster and things just get more and more competitive. So that's how I see the future of the enterprise and of breakout startups.
Do you think we're going to get to a tipping point where there's going to be way too many automations to the point where it's going to be not effective and everything's just going to go back to the way it is?
I think a big part of that is experience, meaning how does the user experience the tool? Cursor is a good user experience. Gamma is a good user experience. Clay.com, good user experience. And because of that, they have big adoption. Not just because the tool is useful, but also because it's easy to use, it's fun, it's easy to learn. You have to keep using it, otherwise something fails. It's sticky, meaning, and it's just part of an embedded experience that forces people to keep using it. So I think, for example, Cursor, I doubt people stop using Cursor. Maybe they have some churn in people who try to compete with Cursor, but there's just a lot of behaviors that people have now adapted to that force these tools to remain embedded in people's workflows. So I think that's going to be super important. Building good experiences that are sticky and force people to to stop churning and to retain. As for people who churn, yeah, there's going to be a lot of tools that are just fads where people use them for a few months, maybe even a few years, they get pretty big, and then they fail because customers don't like the experience. Because at the end of the day, the business only exists to help people, right? It only exists to solve a problem. And if if it doesn't actually do that, if it's not enjoyable to use the product, then people will stop using it.
Speaking about great products, you're also doing something in the BC related field, right? So what do you personally find or look for in a startup itself to consider whether or not to invest in?
Yeah, so I spent some time at a firm called Tower Research Capital as a VC. Talked to lots of startups. I also ran an incubator at Berkeley called AI Entrepreneurs at Berkeley, where I backed and supported lots of startups. Uh, I'm less involved in both nowadays because I'm more focused on the company. But as for just generic things I can say, uh, I think a lot of founders focus on VCs too much. I think the VCs are ultimately a service provider, right? The same way that a hedge fund or a private equity fund or an investment banker is a service provider. It provides capital, or they can be, yeah, they're buy side, right? But if your business doesn't need capital, then you should not think about fundraising until you have a good business, until the business is real. I think people try to raise too early, uh, and that's because there's just a massive risk appetite in the United States and the Bay Area, from where I'm right now. But because of that, that's led to risk. Extreme risk taking leads to sometimes stupid decisions. So people build bad businesses and they get funded, right? Or people build things that won't work and are able to raise a lot of money. And that's because venture capital, by nature of illiquidity, is what we would call an extremely inefficient asset class. Like one company, when they raise, they won't get repriced for another 2 years, which means anytime in the middle, nobody really knows how much they're actually worth. So venture capital can make a lot of returns, or it can make nothing at all. That's why that asset class has, in the top quartile, historically outperformed a lot of other asset classes. But this kind of thing happens all the time, where these asset classes start out illiquid and they become more liquid, and then they become more efficient. So the public markets right now are extremely efficient because hedge funds and especially high frequency traders trade really fast on the public markets. This happened in bonds too. Bonds used to be really high returning, and now they're one of the lower returning asset classes. Crypto is another example. Crypto used to be much less efficient. It's gotten more efficient because hedge funds now trade on there too. So, big picture, I think venture wise, uh, people should focus on building good businesses. They should not focus on raising too early until they actually know what it means to raise, until they have actual pros and cons of raising. Because yes, there are cons to raising venture capital, and uh, when they are ready to raise, they should be very thoughtful. Is this somebody who I actually want to work with, or is it just the cash that's attractive to me? Because ultimately, you're not just raising capital; you're building a relationship with a person for potentially the next decade. So yeah, that's what my advice would be. Venture capital wise.
Hmm. I think previously we also spoke about how you personally stopped doing venture capital because you found doing startups as a more purposeful or passionate item. So, like, talking about venture capital first, do you think this is like a long-term career, or since like venture capital actually just came around in like 1945, like it hasn't been here for such a long time? Like, what do you think about this overall field, as it's like someone's dream career for a lot of these entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think it's pretty risky to try to get into venture straight out of college, because uh, there's very little upward mobility within firms, and there's also few exit opportunities. Like if you're, let's say, an associate at a VC firm, there's very few other types of careers that you can jump to immediately after. Like you can't really go and become engineer at Google, because that skill set is not something you've been honing unless you're a great engineer. I mean, I'm sure there are people who've done this, but you can't go into traditional finance because that's not the type of investing you did. It's tricky to really go into many other career paths. You have to really be good at what you do. You have to be a great salesperson to get into another role. So just by nature, it's very difficult to jump. Like, let's say you're a banker for a few years, it's easier to go and become a private equity person, right? Because you have that skill set, or people know that there's some transferable skill set there. For venture is effectively selling the entire day, because you're selling startup founders, you're selling investors, meaning your own investors in your fund, limited partners. You're selling team members, and maybe you're understanding product and understanding markets, but that's a very broad thing. So in terms of granularity, it's sometimes you support portfolio companies. That's great, but I think it's tricky because jumping out of that career is hard, and also jumping up in a firm is hard, because as an associate, a lot of the people above you don't want to give you promotions, because that means they give you money out of their own pocket, carry. That's the way that they make money in venture firms. And to get upward mobility, you have to find great deals, oftentimes many of which people would take credit for, even if they didn't actually source those deals in the first place. So that's why I think venture as a career track is hard. Uh, I think there's amazing, amazing venture investors that have done great things for the world in finding opportunities and enabling them. But I think it's difficult to be a good venture capitalist unless you've been a founder before, because then you can really support a company. You know what to look for in these early stage teams. I think a traditional finance person who goes into early stage venture capital won't understand what it means to build a team and build a product and build a business from the ground up. Later stage, great, right? Like growth equity, great. But early stage venture, it's very difficult to actually read business unless you have that experience yourself.
Hmm. Hey, jumping back, what was your overall, like, was there a specific purpose that you had with going into this venture fund? Like, was it just to like look at startups and get more creative ideas, or was it to connect with founders, enable networks?
Good question. I think mix of both. I consider myself a student of life and a lifelong learner, which I think is ironic given that I'm a dropout. But the I think the big picture is that I've learned a lot about how these things work. Got to talk to some cool people. I think it's exciting as a career path because you get to work with cool people. But I think it makes more sense if you're a founder first. Nothing against venture people. I think they're awesome people. I work with a lot of them.
Awesome. Jumping to DocuBridge, the startup that you're currently building, raised 3 million in seed round, on track to raising more funds. There are probably lots of podcasts out there, I think, already talking about your startup, where you're building the company, your startup story. But just to switch things up, what is one of the biggest challenges that you're currently facing right now with the company as a co-founder, and how do you plan to approach this?
Yeah, yeah. So I think the CEO, CTO, co-founders, like the titles don't matter. Early stage, you have to be where the biggest fire is, and you have to put that fire out. Right now, for us, the biggest fire is in terms of making the product better, adding new features, and fixing the issues that we have with it. So right now, I operate as a second CTO. I'm coding most of the day. I'm building stuff. Of course I'm still talking to customers, talking to the team, but it's really been very R&D focused because that's where the biggest issues are, and so therefore that's where I need to be. I think it's not something that I can say is, existential. It's not on my mind 24/7, meaning I'm not concerned about it. It's just something that I have to work on because that's the biggest blocker for us to reach the next stage of our growth.
Hmm. Speaking more about like the overall role of like a startup, like early stage member, would you say it's a really lenient role where you have to know how to do everything in small chunks?
Hmm. I think being good at context switching is a very critical skill because if I am only able to, let's say, do so much in a day, then the startup's biggest constraint is me. So learning how to do all of it faster enables the startup to go faster and also helps us grow faster. So let's say I'm only able to, you know, talk to our marketing person and explain to them how to do XYZ, once a week because I'm too focused on coding, then that's slowing down our growth. But if I'm coding every day and I spend, 10 minutes mid coding, talking to the marketing person and then going back to coding, or talking to a salesperson going back to coding, talking to customers going back to coding, or the opposite, where I'm talking to customers the whole day, coding for a little bit to fix a bug, and then back in the customer thing, that's faster. It speeds things up. Maybe people will argue that that breaks focus, but I think you have to learn how to, stay focused even if you're doing many different things. I think that's a hard thing in startups, trying to do many things at the same time, juggling every other challenge out there, because there's always something new with a startup, right? You're always running out of money. You're always going to lose a customer. Your demos break in the most critical moments. Your server is going to go down. There's like massive bugs. You're going to lose a critical team member. There's always, problems, right? Especially in the first year. And then after that, it gets a little easier. So I would say it comes down to learning how to be focused and how to context switch effectively.
So talking more about selling a company, you had experience with doing that with previous companies. So what was your overall experience there? Because I think many startup founders, that's their ideal goal, right? To like sell their company. Pre-acquisition, post-acquisition stages. What were some of your thoughts and some of your feelings?
Yeah, I was really afraid, going into it. I didn't know what to expect. Not just from, for me, as an engineer, as a person who's been through the, building process, the legal part was very scary. I was like, am I going to mess something up in the paperwork and then everything's going to go horribly? Is there, so I think for me, that was a big fear of mine, making sure all the document stuff got done correctly, making sure all the relationships were preserved, making sure my investors were happy, my team was happy, the buying team was happy, and so on. So that was, a very stressful time for me. Uh, I haven't been that stressed in a long time, honestly. It's very rare moments, but that moment was, like extreme anxiety. That period of figuring out acquisition stuff, and that was very hard on me. So really needed to, get through that. But the moment it closed, extreme freedom. It was like, wow, I have been so stressed and finally it's figured out. I went biking and I remember being so happy that day because I just had no more stress of all this paperwork stuff to deal with. And I'm just biking through the hills in Berkeley Hills, just like flying through the air. And it's like, wow, it feels so free, right? Uh, and I think those, two very, very different emotions pairing very well with each other, by the way, like almost extreme opposites, but uh, kind of, goes to show what it felt like for me to go through that process. Thoughts and feelings wise, I thought it was a great experience. Like, first transaction ever, something that was worth like learning and living through. Because I think there's things you can read in a book, and there's things you've lived in your actual life, and those are very, very different types of learning. So for me, it was important that I went through that, knew kind of what it goes like. Everybody's experience is different, right? Because ultimately, it's a seller and a buyer, and they meet and they talk to each other, and there's like a million different type of people, right? So no person is the same. So the process will always be different because the two people, different types of people, different types of deals. So it's a very personal process. I didn't realize that. I thought it was this like big legal thing. But the world is just people, and deals are just agreements between people, right? So learned how things go that way. Uh, and in that process afterwards, I realized that the goal is not to sell the company. The goal is to build something great and serve people well, and to create wealth for your team, for your customers, for your investors, to solve real problems, and to just try to make the world a better place. Selling maybe is part of that, but this time my goal is not to sell so fast, but rather to create a lot of value for people. Maybe consider it, but more so just go as far as I can.
Mhm. Like talking about the specific metrics on what made you sell the company, there are definitely pros and cons with selling the company, right? Rather than just sticking there and growing the business. What was your overall thought process with that back then?
Yeah, for me, I thought it would be a good time for me to sell it, because I think no matter what, like the metrics and stuff, they're numbers, right? But at the end of the day, it's a very personal decision. Like the owner and the co-founders and the owners of the business, whoever they are, could be any combination of people, just have to decide, let's do this, or let's stop doing this, or whatever it ends up being. So it varies a lot from person to person. Like different people have different priorities, and those priorities influence the decisions they make. And different people might pull them one way or another. So it could vary a lot. But for me, I decided to sell because I thought that it would be most beneficial for the team, for the investors, for myself at that time, given where we were as a business, and that it would be a good next step for me personally to, to continue to, be an entrepreneur, try to make an impact in my own way. So try to continue that way.
So not only looking at the metrics, but also personal decisions really important to consider.
Yeah.
So just summarizing everything and closing up the podcast, what should young people do right now to set up for their success? I know this is a really
Yeah.
broad question, but what would you say is like the key metrics to focus on right now, considering AI and everything going on in the world?
Yeah. Yeah. So to sum up, I think it's very important to be a self learner and to pick skills and just be broad. So here's an example. I think that to run a business, it's super important to be good at selling, to be good at building just core software, to know data science and AI, to know some finance, to know some design, to know research, and all these different things, right? So what I'll do is really just go out there and be like, okay, I want to learn finance. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to watch some YouTube videos about how to build you know, financial models in Excel. I'm going to learn about how to evaluate stocks. How do people, real like hedge fund analysts do this? Then I'm going to go on LinkedIn and message all of these, small hedge funds that I can and say, I learned how to do this. Here's, a presentation of who I am as a person and some stock theses that I've come up with. Give me an internship. I'd love to do this for you for free, just to learn as much as I can and just to give you as much value as I can for free. And you can do this for the hedge fund. You can do this for, you can do this for AI research. You can do this for consulting. Just like learn these different skills and collect them. Because as a young person, you have so much time and you have so much learning ability. You don't really have any risk at all. So it's worth doing that before you have to lock into a career and make income, meaning after you, let's say, graduate college, graduate high school. So it's really worth doing these things. Be stupid while you can afford to be stupid. That's my recommendation. When I say stupid, it just means take risks, go out there, learn things, meet new people, and be humble. I mean, don't assume you know everything. When I say this advice, I could be totally wrong, right? You guys all have different situations that that influence the way you make decisions, and I don't know the entirety of that, so I could be totally off in this advice for different people. So I think the biggest thing is to come into everything with that learning mindset, and just be structured in the way you think about learning. So actually go out there and think, how can I actually most efficiently learn how to do, finance? How can I most efficiently learn how to do this? And then step by step, let me go and do that and focus. So that's my, 2 cents. Recommend that people actually get out there and start talking to people and reading things, trying new things, watching YouTube videos to learn, and so on.
For yourself personally, how deep would you go into all of these different domains?
Depends on your goal. I think if you want to be, let's say, a finance person, then there's no real need to learn everything else. And going really deep into finance is great. But it also might be that, you find that being a technical finance person gives you an edge, right? Or it might be that you find that being a finance person who goes into design gives you a really different perspective. So a lot of it depends on the goal and about what's personally interesting to you. Doing what's interesting to you is always, fun and also keeps you engaged. It means you can go longer than everybody else. So that's your superpower. Because then, let's say you're the best designer in the world, you're only the best because you put in more hours, right? So how do you get to that point where you can put in more hours? Make them fun for yourself. So doing what you enjoy, to me, is the best way to get to that point.
Awesome. I think this is a really nice way to end the podcast. Dhruv, really appreciate you hopping on the Gen Z Fastlane. I'll link all of your contacts and everything in the description. So for anyone who wants to contact Dhruv, feel free to do that as well. And yeah, good luck with DocuBridge and everything. And for those listening, have a good one and we'll see you in the next one. Peace out.
Take care. Thanks for having me.